Hello, friends. This is Events Demystify, brought to you by True Fun Events, and I'm your host, Anka. Super excited about today's episode and the opportunity to host not one, but two featured guests all at the same time. And because I want to allocate as much time as possible to our upcoming conversation, I'm going to cut my introduction super short and instead introduce our guests right away. Our first featured guest, Mary Davidson, is the owner of EP Events LLC and has over 10 years of fundraising experience, which has led her to deep diving into the event world, helping nonprofits raise much needed funds for their cause. Purposeful events are her jam, and she is known for event planning, on a budget, and in-depth organization. It is Mary's top priority to help organizations stay true to their mission, purpose, and budget while planning their event. This past year has given Mary the opportunity to become engulfed into the virtual world, utilizing all types of tools to make her events a success. The second featured guest we are going to meet here shortly is Logan Clements, owner of Logan Strategy Group. She is bringing over 6 years of event management and production experience with a passion for people, to-do lists, and problem solving. Over the last year, Logan has applied her production background to the virtual world, managing virtual conferences, virtual escape rooms, experiences, happy hours, several multi-day, multi-session virtual conferences. And now, without further ado, let's welcome both of them in. Welcome, Mary. Welcome, Logan. So excited to have both of you here. How are you both doing? How are you guys staying safe and healthy?
It's a good question. I luckily have air conditioning. And so I feel like I shouldn't say too much. If anything, I should invite all my neighbors over to my house so that they can partake of it as well. But so yeah, it hasn't been too terrible for me, I should say. Then at the same time, I know a lot of my neighbors, their AC units are like icing over because they're using the, I don't know. They overcool, I guess is what I'll say. But Logan, how about you?
I would say that's one vision of how the heat wave has been. I don't have air conditioning, and so it has been quite awful. I'm originally from Philadelphia, from the East Coast, so I am used to heat, and I grew up actually without air conditioning, so I joke I was prepared, but not really. So yeah, we were up in the over 100 degrees for like 3 days in a row. I was luckily out of town for one of those days, so I only had to experience it for 2 days, but it was pretty unbearable. We had all our windows open and fans. You couldn't buy a fan. You couldn't buy an in-window air conditioner here in Seattle area if you wanted to. And we went out and got ice, and it was hard to find ice. So everyone was just trying to kind of stay cool. So I found doing anything I wanted to be productive on, I needed to do it in the morning when it was still cooler. And then as things heated up in the afternoon, my productivity just kind of decreased because the temperatures, I'm on the top floor apartment in my building. And so all the heat just rises. So
it's crazy. Well, just to keep things a little on the light side, because I know this has been awful for so many people. If it gets super hot there, Logan, you have my permission to start undressing and throwing like shirts off. I'm sure nobody's going to mind that.
I was not on video for any calls that I did on those days. And I just blamed the heat wave. I said, you don't want to see what I look like right now. It was pretty awful. And Mary did offer refuge at her place to come and cool off. So
thank you. We were on a phone call though, Logan, and you were, not to call you out, I think you were in cold water. I don't know if that was in your bathtub or what.
Yep, I put my feet in the bath. Yep,
you got to do what you got to do. Yep. So
yeah, the beauty of virtual events, I guess I can do it from home, but I did miss the air conditioning that you get at like a hotel or ballroom or conference center.
For sure. Well, segueing into our conversation today, and while at the same time, sending a lot of prayers to everyone that's out there that needs to try and stay cool and healthy and safe, I wanted to ask you both a question that I honestly haven't asked my guests in a little while, because on my podcast, I started talking a whole lot about hybrid events, but this is something that I've asked everyone that had to go through 2020 and the pivot that has happened for so many of us. And I'm super curious about each one of you and your journey in 2020. What was your main struggle as it relates to the pandemic and the impromptu transitioning from doing in-person live events to producing virtual events? And Logan, if you want to start, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I was alone, and all of us were, what our 2020 was supposed to look like just completely dried up. So I think the hardest part was first reckoning with that. I had a couple dream projects that were confirmed and booked and got canceled because of COVID. And so that was first kind of mourning what would have happened in 2020 was one of the bigger challenges. And then I really just went back to my roots of how I started in events. It was volunteering, and just, I think with events, you need the gig to get the experience. You need the experience to get the gig. So it's kind of that chicken and the egg. And so I went back to what I did when I first started in-person events, which was volunteering and just trying to get experience before I started marketing those skills. And I did it with virtual events, and then quickly learned that so much of what we did in person transferred into the virtual world. It was more of that tech side. I had to spend a lot of time on learning and just listening and trying to talk to the right people. I do laugh that if 2019 me could meet 2021 me, we probably wouldn't know what we were doing. We would be like, we're the technical person? What happened? So, but luckily has learned out for the better. And I'm very excited about the future of kind of hybrid and merging my virtual skills with my in-person ones.
I love that. What about you, Mary?
Yeah, so I started my business during the pandemic, which was a little crazy to even start it at that time. But I didn't think that when it was during the pandemic. And so obviously I knew that there was going to be some virtual component for a while, but then I kind of wondered if I should even try to commit to that or not, because maybe we were just going to be done in like a couple weeks, right? That's how it started. And so I think once I decided like, okay, so I'm just going to commit to this virtual thing and see what happens, then things kind of changed for me. What was difficult was the deciding factor of, am I going to wait this out, or am I going to try this new thing? And I think something that really helped me with that was meeting Logan, because that's kind of when we actually started connecting, is during that time as well. And so to me, it was so helpful to have somebody who had already committed to that and had kind of already engulfed herself in the virtual world to kind of help me. And so I definitely learned from Logan at the beginning, and it's just so immensely helpful. And I'm grateful too that we've been able to partner together on things, because it'd be hard. It's hard, especially for the event professional industry, to decide what events look like for them now, and especially last year. So
yeah. Logan, you've just, I think you came back from working the Olympics this past season, which from what I could gather involved also a lot of international travel. So I have a question for you. How is that part of your work different now than it used to be pre-COVID?
Oh, yeah. I'm gearing up for the Olympics at the time of this recording.
You are?
So
Okay.
that's next month. But yes, I had just had essentially a test event, but it was an international volleyball competition. I got to leave the country for the first time since 2019, which was really exciting. It looked very similar, apart from just with a big layer of COVID over top of it. It was in a bubble format, so we weren't able to go anywhere outside the venue in the hotel. Intensive testing. We were wearing PPE a lot, lots of hand sanitizer. But the energy transfer that I think I missed from virtual events, I think there's a lot of magic that happens virtually, but there is some that in person. It was very cool to be with my team, my production team in person. Yeah. I know, Anka, you also just got to go do an in-person thing. And I was just like, my DJ, my MC, my lighting guy, everybody was all in one location. And so even though we were fist bumping instead of hugging, it was quite magical to go back. And I think one of the things I've loved is before COVID, I really wanted to spend more time on headset. I wanted to do more show calling and queuing. And that was something I'd wanted to do pre-COVID. And then when COVID hit, I thought, oh, there's no way I'm going to do it. And then with virtual events, that's a majority of what I'm doing. Yeah. And so it was really fun to apply what I've been doing from my home using virtual comm systems in person now with an actual headset, and feeling like my confidence has increased and just my comfortability with managing multiple things at once and knowing that you have the right people in the right roles. So it was quite fun. And I'm a big sports nerd. So I say anytime I'm getting paid to do production at a sporting event, it doesn't feel like work. It's just really cool. So
that's amazing. We're going to touch a little bit on the team and having the right team a little later in the episode. But right now, having both of you here is just so awesome. And I want to ask Mary something, because I've heard that you've been working quite hard at starting an annual event retreat for event professionals in the Florida Keys, which sounds amazing. So please do tell us all about it.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited about this. It just kind of, I don't even know how it kind of came to fruition. Me and one of my friends just started talking, and we had this idea about an event retreat. And she was like, this is something I've been thinking about for a really long time. And I was like, wait, me too. This could be so fun, especially as the years go on and it gets established. And so we're doing a retreat in the Florida Keys. There's just 4 of us. And then the hope, though, is this is kind of like the beta year. And it's truly, it's like, we're going to have fun, but also like we have a schedule, because here's the thing, you get a bunch of planners together for a vacation, and it is like so extra, like, because everybody wants a piece. They want to plan part of it. As I talk to other event professionals about it now, like I mention it and I'm like, we might do this again next year. Would you be interested? They're automatically like, yes, I want to do it. I just need to put it on my calendar.
Yep.
And also I want to plan part of it. And I'm like, okay, this is an interesting vibe. Everyone wants to be involved in the planning. But yeah, so I'm super excited about what it's going to come to in years to come.
It's almost like you have to give everyone a little bit of an experience to plan, and then they're going to feel like they have ownership in it. And once you have ownership in it, like, you know, you're going to be there, but also you do care what happens with the outcome of that event, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be exciting to see what happens. So looking forward to it.
We just came from our vacation from Florida with Siesta Beach. I'm not sure how close that is to the Keys, but it was like so awesome. Loved it, every bit of it. Okay, let's get into our meat of the conversation. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes, which is, the mind is everything. What you think is what you become. And I feel like it's so true, because mindset is a critical component of success in business and in sports and life in general, really. And in a previous podcast episode that I had, one of my friends, Marisa Kali, she's a virtual event producer from SoCal, we were discussing how important having a growth mindset is versus a fixed mindset, and how it plays out in terms of the scarcity mentality versus an abundance mentality. And for our listeners that are not quite familiar with these terms, I believe they were first coined by Stephen Covey, and I'm pretty sure I'm butchering the name, but there's this best-selling book that I read and I loved it. It was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In it, he's talking about how scarcity mindset refers to people seeing life as this finite pie, and if one person takes a big piece of the pie, that pretty much leaves nothing for, or very little for, everyone else. And if one person wins, another loses, right? And I have certainly seen that play out in the corporate world, in which most people, they have conditioned themselves to have the scarcity mindset and mentality. It's no wonder, especially when promotions and raises come about, that resources are limited, and there's all this like micromanaging happening, and managers hoarding information. Honestly, it's something that I ran away from when I started my own company, because I just like could not deal with it anymore. What I'm trying to get at here is, and this is a question for both of you, how can we make the shift from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset as it relates to events and partnering with other event professionals and event teams to plan, host, and produce virtual or hybrid or in-person events, really? And any of you can jump on it, and this is a free for all.
I mean, I think it's a great point, Anka. I know that's something I'm really passionate about creating community over competition, and that abundance mindset, like you just spoke about, I feel like just hits the nail on the head. I couldn't tell you, I mean, how I can go back in time and really understand why I had the instinct. The way Mary and I met, I guess I should tell that story. We'd met briefly at an actual event, but it was like, oh, you work in events, I work in events, let's meet. And that was it. And she was actually working events, so she had to run off and do things. And then I'd found out for a project in COVID, it was a virtual event, and this organization wanted to have multiple people kind of propose what they wanted to do. And at that time, I hadn't really been finding that much work. And so part of me was like, at a time like this, why are we competing against each other? Why wouldn't we collaborate and work on it together? And so I actually reached out to Mary and was like, you have local knowledge. I come from more of a production background, but I'm new to the Seattle area. Why don't we join forces on this client and pitch together instead of pitching against each other and having like a pricing war, essentially? And she was so gracious and said yes. And it has opened up so many more opportunities by kind of combining doing not every project. We have separate projects that don't involve each other, but we were definitely stronger together, and that client benefited from having both of our minds on it. And so for me, that really reinvigorated my belief in that whole, community idea, because events, it is so much your team matters. And I'm one person, I'm a one-woman show normally, but I like knowing that if a client came with a big project, I could scale up, and I need to trust those people. And for me, the main way I actually trust people is if I've actually worked with them, seen they do good work, I enjoy their person, I know we'll get along, and that kind of helps me feel confident that then I want to use and work with them in the future.
Yeah, I'm still surprised, Logan, when you called me about helping out with that event and partnering together. I still remember I was like surprised that you called me, because I was like, why would she want to do this together when she could just do it by herself and then make more money? Like, that blew my mind. And that's when I first started my business too, and that's the mindset that I have. And I was very quickly proven wrong time and time again, which I'm so glad that I was, because it's just completely changed the game for me and how I conduct my business as well. So thank you.
Well, honestly, I got my start from other people taking a chance on me and letting me volunteer, or those that first paid me to work. And so that to me, it's like, I've only benefited from collaborating with people, even collaborations that in the end maybe didn't work out, but I wouldn't have known it unless I'd worked with them before. So I've always found that it just helps to be open to it, because you never know who you're going to find and who's going to teach you something new. And that's what with events, and especially this last year, you have to be willing to learn new things. And if you just work by yourself and cut everybody else out and you're the only person who can do things, it's going to a lot harder to learn than when you're working with other people. Because I love the way Mary does things is different than I do in certain instances. And that's taught me how to do it, or even just how to collaborate with other people that then make you a stronger event producer. I don't see any negatives to it. You could say financially, you're splitting that, but you're also splitting the load and the responsibility and the knowledge. And so to me, it's always better for everybody when we collaborate versus trying to kind of elbow each other out of the way.
I love that idea of like surrounding yourself with the people that have the same abundance mindset, because there's a lot of people out there that only see the half empty part of a glass, right? And not that I will only work with positive people. That's not true. Like, I actually enjoy sometimes on my team having a very diverse group of people, and some of them, they're just straight out negative. And I'm like, whatever, like, I will challenge you on that. But it's okay to have your perspective be different than mine, as long as we serve the common goal. And I love you guys' stories, because it pretty much portrays that very much. It's like somebody out there that is thinking that only going after their own thing, kind of lone wolfing and never focusing on how they can incorporate some of other people in their business or their event. I don't think that long-term that's successful. If you want to go a distance, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Like, find someone that you can go together with and serve the purpose of the event or the purpose of whatever business or adventure you're on. And having the ability to train your mind to recognize all the possibilities that an abundance mindset brings to the table is another thing. It just opens your mind to more options, more choices, more resources, right?
Yeah, well, I always say too, it's like with events, you're only as strong as your team. And so if I know good people, it only helps me, because I only look better. If Mary's great at what she does and I bring her in on a project and we work together and people are like, Mary's amazing, that doesn't mean they think I'm less than. That it just makes me look better because I've brought in another good person. Same thing as we get busy with that abundance mindset. We're all going to have fully booked calendars. You need to have another person or other people who do similar to what you do, if not exactly what you do in a slightly different way, that you can refer people to, so that you're still feeling like you're adding value to people that you might not have the bandwidth to take on. And I find it so silly if you're just someone who thinks that, oh, this is mine, I'm not going to tell you what I do, here's my super secret sauce that's mine. Like, how they kind of get along through these busy times and things like that. Because to me, my network and my community has been my rock. And even on big projects, Mary and I were a part of a really big project. And I said I had a weird sense of zen the night before the event, because it was like, things are going to happen tomorrow. Something's going to go on according to plan, but I have the right people in the right roles, and I know them and trust them that if something's happening, let me either problem solve it themselves or let me know. And it was this amazing feeling that I wish on all of my clients, hopefully when they work with me, that they have that feeling. It was really special, and something I don't think I would have gotten when it was just me having that kind of confidence.
I'm glad that you brought that up because it really does help build you as an individual, your business, or if you're a freelancer, like it really helps build your credibility when you have good people on your team, like you're saying. And so it only really in reality makes you look better, but not only that, it helps ease your mind along the way. And so when some people talk to me, they're like, so could you do a conference, for example? I'm like, well, me alone, maybe not. But luckily I have a team. And I mean, really, I'm like typically an independent contractor. So it's just me, myself, and I. But yes, I do have a team of other individuals that I can call on and that I can trust. And then it opens up so many more doors because of that. And another thing that's been great about the virtual world is half these people that I call on, they live everywhere. And that's amazing to me that we can all just call on one another. So I guess that's a pro of the last year that has really built relationships with people who live all around.
I love that too. I mean, I wouldn't have met you ladies and a few other event producers that I am friends with now. It was all due to COVID, really, and meeting each other online. I mean, how awesome is that, right? It's like it almost takes me back to all the years of like online dating.
I was going to say, yeah, online dating.
Well, Anka, you'll love this. I told multiple people, it's so funny that, there's people I've worked projects on that like, I don't know how tall they are because in Zoom world, we all have the same amount of real estate to work with. So
that's right.
It's more a joke, but if anything, and even Mary and I have most of our relationship was virtual. So it was so funny when we met, she's got me by like an inch or so, but it has been really funny that you get these opportunities to meet people virtually. And I know one big thing here in the Seattle area and in Washington state, or Seattle specifically, the Seattle freeze. So socially, it's hard to meet people. They'll be nice to you, but then they will freeze you out later, meaning there's not a lot of follow-up. And so when I had first moved here, I came from Shanghai, and in Shanghai, the event community was very collaborative. Everybody knew everybody, and you'd scale up for big projects. You might compete for the same thing, but at the end of the day, we're all friends and we're just kind of trying to make each other booked and working. And in Seattle, I found it was really hard to meet people. I had a lot of people who were very nice, had great meetings, but then there wasn't really any follow-up. So that Seattle freeze, what's reinvigorated my faith in like the US event community was virtual events. And like Mary said, meeting people from North Carolina, New York, California, Austin, everywhere. And they're just like me of just getting nerdily excited about creating really fun online experiences. And they're good at what they do. And nothing makes me happier than working with or promoting people who are good at what they do and are passionate about it. So it's been very cool to see the community that we've been able to build. Because of COVID, we've been less geographically constricted. And now at this point, I would fly some of these people in because they're just that good.
No, that's amazing. And honestly, that's exactly what it comes down to, like being able to trust someone with parts of your event and knowing that that's not going to take away from you. That is the abundance mindset that we're talking about here. So with that in mind, I guess, and you mentioned your experience, how you two met. How do we find each other? If somebody's listening right now and they're like, oh, that sounds amazing. I love that idea. But like, how do we find those people that are on the same mindset? And especially as it relates to events, and what does this collaboration look like as we move into hybrid and back to in-person?
Yeah, I'll just touch on real quick how do we find each other? Because this is something that I've been like deep diving into lately. And I think there's a few different places, but one of those places is I'm fairly active, I guess, on social media, or at least I try to be for my business. And so if another planner follows me, I will like almost always reach out to them and say like, hi, can we just meet and learn about each other? And I've never had anyone say no to me just by asking if we can meet. And I usually just word it like, I'd love to learn more about your services and see how we can support one another. That's like always how I say it. And everyone says yes. And it's always a really great conversation. I think, Anka, that's kind of how I might have approached you as well, actually, originally.
Oh, yes. On LinkedIn, I remember. That's right. And it just actually already led to a few collaborations. So there you go.
Yeah. So you just never know. And so like, it hurts my heart a little bit when I hear people that I don't know if they're too fearful to reach out, or they just think it might not work or something like that. Cause I'm like, all you have to do is ask. The worst thing is that somebody says no, but then at least they know about your business too. Like you still are bringing awareness to yourself when you reach out. So yeah, Instagram, LinkedIn, like you said, Googling local planners that are in your area. Yeah, it's kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head, Mary. I would just even say the worst case scenario is just they don't respond. Silence is kind of probably the biggest deterrent for people. But like Mary said, they've heard about you. And the only way you can hurt yourselves, it's a very unprofessional outreach. You misspell a ton of things and you leave a bad impression on your brand.
Or
but if anything,
you become annoying reaching
or
out.
yes, or you do
that
it
has happened before. And I'm like,
yeah, or you do it too frequently. Yeah, I would just say if you're thinking about reaching out to someone, just do it. You never know. I will say some of my best connections have come in mysterious ways, not directly from someone who worked for an event company, but someone who did something else and they then knew someone who needed an event or someone to help. So it's a lot of indirect connections. And so you'll be surprised who you can get access to, like Mary said, through social or just an email. My biggest thing is just, yes, in those emails, one, sounding professional, and two, kind of doing your homework. When I was a student in university, I sent a lot of emails out to people who lived in China because I wanted to move there. And I tried on purpose to look up either something about them or had a very specific question I asked them. And I had a varying degree of responses and a lot of people didn't respond. But those that did, it was helpful, either positive or negative feedback on making that move. But I've been receiving some recently from students that are very copy and paste generic and don't actually have a question in it. It's just like, I'm a student interested in X and I'd love to talk to you about what you do. And that's it. And I say, if they had just embedded one specific question, I have like a canned response now that is like, tell me more about what I'm happy to answer your questions. Just send them to me. And then that leads somewhere or not. But yeah, I think if you're someone looking to find other people with that abundance mindset, the quickest way to know if they are is if they get back to you. They're usually, that means then open to connections and open to kind of growing with you. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Before we move any further, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our main sponsor, Trifan Events, which is a boutique event planning and production agency that will come alongside you, offering personalized event planning and technical support, strategic event design, production and technology management, and flawless execution for live, virtual, and hybrid events. The team at Trifan Events is passionate about planning and producing event experiences that get people involved with true moments of interaction, engagement, and co-creation, while offering white glove treatment throughout the entire planning process, enabling you to reach your event goals with the use of creativity, production tools, and event technology. To find out how Trifan Events can plan and produce your event become memorable, go to trifanevents.com. Absolutely. So how does this type of collaboration, how could it look like as we move into especially hybrid events? Because we've done virtual events. We know kind of sort of how that looks like you mentioned, that you can work with people from all over. And even with hybrid events, that's true. But as we move to in-person, how do you see that collaboration look like? And Logan, you mentioned flying people in.
Yeah.
That's one way, right?
One way is to fly people in. I mean, hybrid is essentially like two events now. You know, you need your in-person staff and you would also need someone to manage the virtual side, which you would hypothetically have that person in the exact same physical space as you, but that person could also be remote. So some of these connections, whether the client has the budget to fly in team that's remote or just engage them from their homes. If anything, I think there's just more jobs and more bodies that we're going to need to run events, you know, whether it's someone who's moderating in person and then someone who's moderating the chat room. Hypothetically, that could be the same person at a hybrid event, but it's a lot to do. So that's where I kind of see that collaboration, that I'm going to be needing to plan more complex events that are going to be harder for one person, which pre-COVID probably one person could have handled. And now knowing that I have this network of people remote or able to come in person. And then also just because I was still so new to Seattle before things shut down, my like in-person vendor list is quite short. So that's one where I know like Mary has a lot more experience here locally. So leaning on her and on others for good recommendations of companies that were able to weather the storm and make it through COVID. And because you're only as strong as your partners. I feel like everything I'm hearing about hybrid, it's all about your AV partners and how good they are. And I had an unfortunate negative experience with a company for a virtual event, but the AV company was in person. And it just continued to solidify in my head how important your partners and that level of trust is. And so I'm a lot more likely to go with a recommendation from someone who I've worked with virtually than someone they recommend than I would just somebody cold off the street or from a Google search or something like that.
Absolutely. What about you, Mary? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, similar. So I would say start now to, like Logan said, build that network of partners. And it's not too late. Like just start now, dedicate like 1 hour a week or something like that and start just trying to meet any type of vendor that you might need to hire for an event. Because I feel like when I meet with potential clients, it's like one of their first questions is like, they want to know about me. They also want to know about who else I can bring or like what other connections I have. And so if anyone who's listening can try to get those as fast as they can now, it's just going to really set you up for success when you do start going into those hybrid events. So I just want to echo what was said. I completely agree. And then it's a pleasure to bring other people on because they can take ownership as part of it, kind of like we've been talking about over and over over again. So in a hybrid sense, I just see this being more important than ever, right? So hybrid sense of this has been going on for a while, right? But pre-pandemic, there were still hybrid events, but now they're more common, and it's also scary because it's new. And so what can we do to help it not seem so scary, especially for event professionals who haven't done a hybrid event before? And I think that's leaning on each other. So
absolutely.
Well, and speaking of that, it's a great way to reach out to people. So Mary and we have a podcast together called the Better Events Podcast. And we had one of my friends that I've worked on an event with remotely as a guest, Vanessa Loney, and she'd post on LinkedIn being like, just did a hybrid event. Wow, all these lessons I learned, but your AV partner matters. And I shot her an email and was like, can we have a call next week? I want to learn more about what you explicitly just had happen. And she, took the time of day, and we had a quick 30-minute meeting to chat about her experience. And again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, is like so much about being successful in events is having a willingness and openness to learn. And maybe you're really good at learning from reading a book and sitting there by yourself, but so much of what we do at the events, you only know by doing. And we can't do all the things. So it's really helpful just to talk to people who have done those things and having those open channels of communication, because often people are willing to share and you just have to ask.
Absolutely. So all three of us are pretty much solopreneurs. And like it's been said, it is within our business fabric of working events to partner with other event teams and AV vendors and food and beverage and registration, decor teams. I mean, working with freelancers, that's something that I have done before COVID. It was a huge part of my business model. And over the years, I've experienced working with some really great teams and what that looks like versus, working with a team that either you've never worked with before, so you didn't get really a chance to vet them, or aside from maybe it was the recommendation that you trusted, but you really didn't necessarily get to work with the team itself. And in my experience, the success of an event depends highly, if not all of it, really on who did you bring on, and are you working with the right people, with the right professionals qualified for the jobs that you've hired them for. And I have a little story to share because not too long ago, just recently, it's kind of fresh, I experienced what the opposite looks like and how frustrating and time consuming it can be. And it is fresh because I was working on this hybrid conference, right? So we go back to like the hybrid events of doing something that is both in person and virtual. I have hired a team, which at the time when I hired them, I've already worked with them before. So I trusted them. I knew that they're going to deliver. I knew that they're going to be there. They're going to do a great job. And unfortunately, there are certain things that have happened on their end, certain dynamics, which pretty much ended up affecting my event. At the end of the day, for my event, I ended up getting like one person out of the team, not the whole team. And that one person relying on a lot of freelance labor, which they haven't worked with, I haven't worked with. So then sure enough, here comes the call at 8 a.m. on the day that we're supposed to be loading in and setting in and saying that, oh, by the way, we got some labor problems. We don't actually have people. The ones that committed, they realized that they got other commitments. I mean, it was just getting just better and better. And having to make, those calls to basically cover my bases. And there's nothing like calling technicians last minute during a super busy month to come and basically save your ass.
Yeah.
So sometimes you get to see the writing and you get to see the red flags. And honestly, that weekend, I was already starting to prepare myself, like starting to talk to a few of my event leads. Hey, by the way, I might need to call you last minute. I'm so sorry that if that will happen, but I'm starting to like feel a little uneasy about this. And I just learned about whatever drama that was going on this other end. And it was just something that I'm like, okay, I'm trying to call some of my contacts, that local contacts that I know, because we have to be, when I told my client I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there, even if I have to fabricate people. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to have to figure out, right? So as an event producer, though, it was so frustrating, but I also felt for my client because as much as I tried to shield them from everything that was happening, pretty much like the nightmare of having people unqualified to do the job, I had content that I needed to deliver. And while during the event, they might have not realized that there's a lot of things happening on comm. If you get a lighting guy to run your sound, you're in trouble because you're telling them how to EQ microphones, how to compress, how to route signal, all of this like overcome, like live training on the job, first day on the job. But my problem was at this point, it wasn't just my problem. It became my clients. And that's what it bothered me the most because now I knew I had so much content that I needed to deliver. And this content was getting compromised. And there's parts of it that was was basically unusable. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to take a whole lot of Jesus and miracle to pull this off, because I never edited like a maniac. Like the nights after the event, I was like a maniac editing in between other events. I'm like, I need to deliver content. I need to make sure that this content is usable. They can still use part of it, even though like I'm just trying to cut and clean as much as possible out of this. And that's when I realized that I, for the longest time, have taken for granted what it's like to rely on a professional team without having to worry about at all, like without having to worry that they will show up or they will perform up to the standard required of them. So I guess to wrap this up, because I had to get it off my chest, because it's obviously still a sore subject for me. What are your best tips to getting access to or building a team of professionals from your experience? And I've got some of my own, a team of freelancers that you can rely on for your events, especially those in-person teams that I feel like with virtual events, if I take on a virtual event, if I rely on myself, I'm 100% sure that it's going to happen, right? Or I have a team that I can call on. But with in-person, like you both were mentioning, having to have that team, the in-person audio production team that has to supply equipment, has to supply certain skills to get a job done. It's super important. So what are your best tips to get that type of team in your set of tools and resources?
I mean, I think reiterating a lot of what we just said, it's like you're constantly talking to people. If you're someone trying to build your network, you're obviously going to do that. But even if you have a network, I'm always looking for good people. If you are someone listening to this podcast, you are good at what you do. Like we want to hear from you, just because, like you said, you could never have enough people who are good at what they do, because you never know something like that's going to happen. I try to be really transparent with my teams, both with their time expectations. So if I can know for sure, are we locked in, or is it soft answer that you're available right now, but you're not holding the date for me, especially for technical directors and leadership roles, I found you really want to lock in. But yeah, I think it's just constantly talking to people and finding those good partners. And if not from personal experience, because hybrid's new and it might feel scary when you're first jumping in, just knowing who you can talk to who's done it before. I also am a big fan of like at events, as I'm starting to go back to events now as an attendee. I constantly am like doing research when I'm there, because I always want to know like who's behind the setup and things, because when it goes well, I want to know who was a part of it. Just like if things don't go well, I kind of also want to find out who's a part of it, just so I know. But a lot of it is scary as an event professional sometimes, because you don't know until you work with those people or that happens. My negative AV experience with a virtual event team was very similar to that, Anka, but it was not personnel issue, but more a culture issue of the group that I was working with, and accountability and transparency and things that I hold my values. And I found that a lot of our conflict came because my values were not the same as theirs. And so finding those people that you can trust, I think, is really important, and being open with them. So like Mary said, we don't have people on staff. And so I'm not paying a salary. So I understand if someone else comes along with a project for some of my freelancers, that's what they're going to take, but just open if I want them to hold a date for me, knowing I probably need to pay them a deposit or something to get them to hold it, and doing it sooner rather than later. Because I think that's my biggest thing that I'm seeing coming up, is a lot of the good people I work with are also getting busy because they're so good. I was like, my biggest advice to any clients or event hosts or organizers is start to try to book your team now, because the people who know what they're doing and are good at it are going to be in short demand, just because everybody needs them. They all want good people. It's a great problem to have, but if you're trying to scale up, it can be challenging.
And get those dates, on the calendar, because I feel like that's one of the things where, especially even when I get something like a request for a proposal or like availability, people are just like, are you available to do this event? I'm like, if you don't send me a date in the same body of the email, you're technically wasting our time. Because it is the date that matters. And then we can discuss budget, and we can discuss details and options and everything else, right? Like the format and the programming and all of that. But the date is what's going to make it or not make it. And I had an event that booked in September during a time when I'm already booked. So I had to reach out to some vendors that I haven't worked with, but we had enough conversation to feel that I can trust them. And we're in process of like deploying this complete brand new team for in-person, completely out of town in the middle of like Midwest. And you'd think I would feel nervous, but honestly, I'm feeling secure just because I've done enough research on this team. I've seen their work. And I think this client, because it's a big client, is in good hands. So yeah, like you said, Logan. And Mary, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I love everything that's been said. I just think it's also, there's no problem in asking them to send someone you want to hire an example of their work or something like that, something from their portfolio that they can send your way. Most likely they have something. So, it's referrals, word of mouth, but they could also send something. And then I've had some people I talk to, it's so funny. They're like, just name some of the clients that you've had. And I'll like name drop or something. They're like, okay, that's enough. And I'm like, that's a terrible question because you have no idea what I actually did.
Oh, I hate that question. I've been in a freelancer group interview before and they're like, tell us about your relevant experience. And the first person just started name dropping names of clients that they've worked with. And then the next person followed and the person after that followed. And I was like, this is so irrelevant. You could have worked with Justin Timberlake, but that doesn't mean you were good at what you did. He could have hated you. And
we don't even know what you did for Justin.
Yeah.
You could have just
got his coffee.
Exactly. Like, what did you actually do?
Yeah. But people ask that. I get it. Sometimes it comes from a trust. That's to them a trust building exercise. If they recognize the names of who you've worked with, then they can be like, oh, they trusted you. Okay, I trust you. Like, I get it. But I'm with you, Anka. I think the devil's in the details with the interview. If you are going to be working with people you've never worked before, I had never thought to ask people kind of about their values or how they respond to tech issues and things, like getting very granular, I guess, with them and wanting to know how they respond to those moments of adversity are going to definitely be on my interview list if I'm having to work with anyone I've never worked with before. Again, from personal experience of having realized how much conflict it can cause if they're not following the same thing as you. Because I say things are going to go wrong. My biggest thing is like, how do you respond to it? And having a plan and having open channels of communication are like the most important part. I'm never mad that things go wrong. It's more of how did we respond to it and how can we problem solve and things like that. And not everyone has that mindset. And those are the people that I don't work well with. I don't enjoy working with. I like to attract more people that have that kind of same open-mindedness and willingness to learn.
Absolutely. Mary, do you want to add anything else to that?
No, I don't think so. I think that wraps it up on that piece really well. So
awesome. Well, I was going to move into the probably one of the last questions that I have for both of you today, because we can't really talk about COVID without touching, mental health and how to stay ahead of the curve. And I feel like it was only a matter of time that mental health awareness would become so front and center. And especially during the pandemic, we all became quite aware of it because we had to acknowledge that we are vulnerable to certain situations. We are vulnerable to not working together and being apart. And I guess my question to you is, how do you both prioritize your mental health and how do you keep yourself healthy? Do you have any personal strategies that you like to share with our audience, especially as it relates to event planners, event professionals, and anyone that's really in the event industry?
Super good question. I think this is something that I'm continuing to work on. And Logan and I have talked about this a little bit as well. It's like starting a business and the pandemic all at the same time. It's definitely been a learning curve as far as like my mental health and what I need. And when I think of what I want the future of like my business to be, I want it to be around. And so if I want it to still be around, I need to think of what's going to sustain it. And if I just go like 60 miles per hour all the time, not taking any time for myself, that's going to burn me out. And so that's not really helping me toward my long-term goals. So if I can just like remember that big vision that I have, then that can help. It's hard to do, right? Especially when you're really into the nitty-gritty part of things. But for me, it's reminding myself to take that time for myself and setting boundaries, which Logan, I'd love to hear your thoughts because I feel like this is something we've kind of seen each other working on, saying like, actually, I can't do that today because I'm really trying to take this day for myself. Like, I hope you understand, and having others support you in that too, I think is really important.
Yeah, having Mary as an accountability partner has helped. This is a muscle that I was working on pre-COVID. And I think if anything, going through it all and quarantining and all that fun stuff that we had to do of staying at home here in Washington State, really realized how much I prioritize clients or projects like my event work, because I love it so much, over things that I would do for myself personally. So that's been a goal as I've gotten busier again, and now things are starting to open back up, of making sure I'm carving time out for myself. I'm a big proponent of therapy if you can afford it. And then there are a lot of affordable options out there and free versions. I talked to a therapist and I think they're great to have that sounding board, but also little things like I turned all my notifications off on my phone apart from phone calls and text messages. So I don't have emails pinging at any time. I have to consciously go in and look at them. And then, just trying to take those moments. So I think one of the recent ones I've been doing is no meeting Wednesdays. So I've been trying to make it that I don't schedule any meetings on Wednesdays. I was better at it before I just traveled for work. I've come back and had to catch up on things, but that has been nice just to create space space, I think, is the biggest thing. It's very easy to fill your day, but as a business owner and somebody, an event professional, I find like taking space and either doing nothing or just leaving space for whatever you feel that you want to do in that moment is harder than it sounds. And so for me as a planner, I have to plan my nothing time. So yeah, but that's
I love
something
that.
that's important. Yeah.
I remember when the quarantine really started, I realized that I had to get a game plan. Like I had to start on a game plan for myself. How was I going to keep my mind fresh? It wasn't new for me to work from home. Actually, I have done it like 4 or 5 years prior to that, but it became a priority on having to spend some quality, quiet time in the mornings. And to this day, I spend about 60 minutes of like morning journaling, meditation, and just having this practice to really center my mind. This has been really my saving grace because during quite of a difficult time this past season, it really helped me be more intentional and mindful of how I'm using my time, like you both said, because at the end of the day, I recognize this. I can be a little bit of a workaholic. I like to call myself recovering workaholic, but the reality is there is a very little recovery there because I still love to be working a whole lot because it's in so many ways like an escape mechanism for me, you know, and that can come at the expense of myself, my health, my family. And scheduling specific blocks of time in my calendar for specific things like gym time and even lunch time and admin time and social media time and deep dive into business planning time, and all of which has really helped to keep myself focused and productive, but also allowing myself to say, okay, if this time is scheduled as a time off, then you better head out early and shut off your phone and your computer and your emails and all the notifications and just take a moment for yourself. And I feel like this has become even more something that I became aware of during COVID than before, because I could be in front of my many screens all day long and now realize that hours have passed by and I didn't even take a break. Just taking a 15-minute break to go outside around the neighborhood and maybe listen to some music, listen to a podcast, Events Demystified or Better Events podcast, right? Maybe an audiobook, whatever it is. And I would love, you know, as we're coming to a close here, if you have any last tips, remarks, thoughts that you like to share with our audience, either regarding the mental health awareness or events in general or anything else that might come to your mind.
Well, I think I'd have two lasting thoughts. One would be, it took me probably 3 years into my business to learn that it's okay to put an out of office message, even though I'm the only employee. I don't know why in my head I thought it would be like the end of the world. I would hear from all my clients how mad they were. I was unreachable like between Christmas and New Year's. And I did it. And I came back and there was like nothing that was urgent and nobody said anything to me. And I'd primed some clients knowing I was going offline, but don't be afraid to do that. If that's something you need to mentally make sure you don't need to check your inbox, even if you're the only employee, like time off is normal. I think we're getting away from that workaholic or just working really hard all the time, reachable all the time. So do it next time you go on vacation, set an out of office message. And then for just coming back to kind of our community over collaboration, if you are someone who's thinking about getting involved with events or you're trying to network, like send the email, do it. You might be worried or you might sound silly or you don't know how to start. There are tons of templates you can look at or just take from what Mary said earlier of just, hey, I want to learn more about what you do. What times are you available? I think that's usually the biggest barrier is there's probably a lot of connections we're missing because one person is just not sending out that initial inquiry. So don't be afraid to do that.
Absolutely. Mary?
Yeah, just echoing what Logan just said at the end there. If you are listening to this and you feel like you're somebody who maybe feels a little bit lost, or you're like, I just need to network with people, feel free to reach out to us as well, right? We're trying to build a community of like-minded individuals. And so if that's somewhere where you need to start, feel free to do that to us as well, right? We want to practice what we preach. And so just want to open that door as well.
Yeah. Well, on that note, then, Mary and Logan, where can people find you and reach out to you?
Yeah. So you can reach out to the both of us if you want through our podcast, which is at Better Events Pod on Instagram. And then we also have an email, which is bettereventspod@gmail.com. And then if you want to reach out to us individually, you can find me, Mary, at EP Events LLC on most social platforms. And then Logan, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me at Logan M. Clements on social or Logan Strategy Group, though. Feel free to reach out. Again, we're always like reiterated here. We're always looking to connect with good and passionate people.
Fantastic. Well, it was a fabulous conversation. I had such a good time. I'm so glad that we got to do this, and I'm excited to be airing this out. I am always looking forward to podcast episodes that involve female live streamers like yourselves and event producers, because I'm like, there's more of us in the there's an army forming. I see it.
It's amazing.
Yes. And I love that we got to do this. Thank you so much for this time that you allocated for us to have this conversation. And I look forward to partnering with each one of you in the future and just keeping up with what you're up to, because there's a lot of exciting things that I know you're both working on. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, friends, this is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for all of you that are listening here in the US as well as around the world, because I am so grateful to know that wherever you're tuning in from, you will get some great content. And that is what this episode was all about. Please do take a moment to subscribe on your favorite listening platform and leave a 5-star review, just, to make this podcast visible to more event professionals like yourselves. As always, I welcome your feedback. Keep that coming either via DM on Instagram at Events Demystify Podcast or via email at podcast@3funevents.com. And I've also opened the WhatsApp as another line of communication, so you can find me. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Until next time.